Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Mental Health Awareness Week webcast on understanding financial anxiety. So before I explain more about the aim of this webcast and what we're hoping to achieve, I'd like to just go around and introduce the wonderful panel joining us today. So I'll take the opportunity now to open up the floor to each of our panelists, just so you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your role. Raghu, can we start with you and move round?
Sure, brilliant. Hi, everyone. I'm Raghu Narula. I'm the Managing Director looking after customer engagement and distribution at the NatWest Group.
Wonderful, thank you. Can we move on to David now?
Thanks, Charlene. My name's David Nikolic. I'm founder and managing director of Abstract. We're a learning and development company working primarily within the financial service sector.
Perfect, thank you. And last but not least, can we move on to Niki, please?
Thanks, Charlene, and hi, everybody. My name is Niki Garcha-Davies. I work for Lloyds Banking Group, Head of Financial Crime, and I'm also one of the lead mental health advocates there.
Perfect, thank you, Niki. So that covers our panel for this session and what is sure to be a very insightful discussion. So before we start, I just wanted to give some background to the webcast we're running today. As viewers will likely already be aware, it is Mental Health Awareness Week across the UK. So here at the Chartered Banker Institute, we wanted to focus on the topic of financial anxiety for those working in the banking sector and really just get to the heart of some of the adverse effects this can have, especially in the difficult economic struggles of today. So just to give some stats, according to a study published by the Mental Health Foundation in November 22, 29% of adults experienced stress, 34% experienced anxiety, and 10% said they felt hopeless because of financial worries during the previous month. So I'm sure you'll agree these are quite worrying statistics, and it's important for us as a sector to be aware of struggles which might be affecting those we work with. So what we'd like to do here today is just to examine what organisations can do to help employees experiencing financial stress, to share useful advice to any individuals experiencing this, and to help others support customers or colleagues who might have financial struggles. There'll be a Q&A section at the end of the webinar so that viewers can have the opportunity to ask the panel any questions you might have. Okay, so just to start off, let's just have a general discussion just on financial stress and its adverse effects. So I'll come to Niki first. Niki, how common would you say financial stress and anxiety is, and how serious can its effects be?
I think the short answer to that really is very. I think all of us manage our finances, and all of us manage our mental well-being as well. So, at any given time, where the state of your finances are, it's one of the key drivers towards having, worry, paying bills, financial commitments, etc., overspending, overcommitting, etc., as well. And I think that the effects are known to all of us, either because of our own personal situation or for those of us that are working in an industry where we support others. It's something that we're hugely kind of committed to helping as well. And there's hundreds of colleagues across the banking sector that are helping customers on a day-to-day basis, and I think the effects can be anything from mildly serious to hugely serious. We talk about anxiety, we've talked about stress, the stats that you just shared there, Charlene, and I think that each one of us has our own journey with our mental health, depending on how different triggers can impact your mental health. That can actually be quite severe, and it can lead to quite severe outcomes in some cases, unfortunately. So it's something that we should absolutely keep at the forefront of our own minds for ourselves, but also if we're in a role where we're helping others, we should be really thinking about the difference we can make to others as well.
Thanks, Niki. And in order to help us recognise some of these signs, what would you say the signs and symptoms are that we see in people who are experiencing financial stress. We'll come to David first, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Charlene. I think that the signs and symptoms are critical, really. Niki was just talking about the effects, and the effects can be a sense of helplessness. With that sense of helplessness, it grows and it grows, and it's like a deep pit. But the signs are often, with your customers, the signs will be, their financial activities, and you won't really see a great deal more. But certainly with your colleagues, we can see a gradual or a sudden withdrawal. This often leads to noticeable personality or behavioral changes. These are quite recognizable. So we have a choice. We can ignore them or we can step in. Whose responsibility is it? And I think that's one of the questions. Is it all down to the individual, or is it down to all of us? Is it down to the organization? So there are usually three visible signs that occur. And the first one is a lack of concentration. So the person sort of fails to get continuity. And we've said that already, have we? Did I not ask you to do that? And there's certain, ideologies going on that the person is not signed up to. And the second one is a difficulty in maintaining or building relationships. Now, that can be personal, that can be business relationships. So, that's really, really key. If we see that happening, there's a personality and behavioral change, it's key. And then the third one is actual physical symptoms. So are people not coming into work? People can't get out of bed. They're taking more time off. Are they going out for hours on end and coming back in? Is something changed? So, we're more likely to notice this with our colleagues, as I say, but the key is, whose responsibility is it? And we'll talk a bit later on about how businesses have actually got much better at solving this.
Thanks, David. Would you have anything to add there, Raghu?
Yeah, no, I think David's talked about, the impact on mental well-being, on even physical well-being, and, the quality of life and how that manifests itself behaviorally. And we've seen that particularly around how it starts to affect customers' decision-making processes. So, we're making short-term reactive decisions rather than long-term ones. I think Niki touched on, almost a sense of denial where you start to avoid having those discussions around bills or financial commitments, or, the manifestation in the point on relationships, on arguments about money. But if I were to move it towards the financial activity that we start to observe, I think clearly the savings behavior across the country, nearly 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 even, depending on what context you cover, of adults in the country have less than £100 in savings, right? So absolutely no savings in which to cover emergency expenses. And if you take the savings pools that were slightly built up during the pandemic, a lot of those are getting eaten into, given what customers are needing to face into in terms of cost of living. And the kind of things that one starts to see typically are around, the buying patterns in, you start to make only minimum payments on your credit cards. The overcommitment that Niki was referring to in spending more than you earn, where you start to use, your borrowing facilities in overdrafts, in credit cards, in loans, to start to pay for regular household bills. So if you would take a research that we've done suggests that pre-pandemic, we had roughly about 9 million adults in the UK used to even borrow to pay for their food and their bills on a regular basis. And that has post-pandemic grown by nearly 50%, right? To nearly 13.5 million customers are now, during cost of living, starting to dip into borrowings to pay for what are regular commitments. And then if you take it further, the consolidation of loans and all your credit card dues without having a payment plan being in place, and then typically what would move on the extreme end into actual defaults, right, by way of loans or mortgage payments. But the fact of the matter is, nearly 8 million adults are currently behind in at least one bill at any one point in time. And so, the signs and symptoms are there for us all to see, and we should not be fooling ourselves that it isn't happening to either ourselves or someone near us.
Yeah. And Niki, just on that point, do you think there's enough support across the banking industry, or indeed the wider corporate world, when it comes to helping those dealing with these kinds of issues?
So I think this is probably one where myself and Raghu probably got some insight and some thoughts on as well. And interestingly, I know Raghu just said about 8 million people struggling to pay bills. I've literally read this morning on the way to work that the FCA's just released a survey where it's actually 11 million, so it's gone up by 3.1 million. And that's the latest. So going back to some of your earlier questions around, is it common? Is it on the increase? What's the impact of what we're seeing? This is the impact of post-pandemic, plus so many different factors as well. I think from a banking and a financial services perspective, are we doing enough? I've been working in banking and financial services for over 25 years. I know I don't look old enough, but yeah, 25 years. And I think that I've seen a lot change in the way that relationships with customers are managed, especially when it comes to financial stress and financial matters. I think that the regulators played a big part in that. I think, the introduction of regulations like consumer duty and such, making sure that we have a view of customer vulnerability, which can be in so many different ways. The kind of causes of vulnerability quite often will lead to some financial stress. So being able to identify vulnerability, being able to have the right conversations with customers around those vulnerabilities. So there's a lot that's changed, I think, in the shape and mold of how conversations are held. One of the things that we also probably should bear in mind is that quite often a lot of our customers are customers in their own right, but also they hold businesses that we support as well. So quite often it's not just their bank account, to pay the bills, it's their business, and so that can be quite a scary place when your livelihood is, and therefore is also impacting your ability to pay bills as well. And then I think the other thing I would say is that equipping colleagues themselves to have conversations. I know we'll talk about this later in terms of support available for colleagues, more of support available for customers as well. But I think that I've seen a change in the years that I've been working in banking. But I would always heavy caveat that with, I think that because of the world that we now live in and the crisis that we kind of have around us when it comes to financial stress, I think there's always more that can be done. I think there's always more, and we shouldn't always just be thinking about responding to the regulator. We should just be thinking, and our strategies, I know at NatWest and Lloyds, strategies are built with the customer at the heart of those strategies, which is absolutely right. So Raghu, I don't know if you've got something to add on that as well.
I think you covered it, and pretty much the purpose of why we exist is around helping individuals, right, families, businesses, in actually helping thrive. And I think a cost of living environment really gives us the opportunity to face into this. And I keep using the parallel as, if you take the pandemic as a once in 100-year event and this becoming the next once in 100-year event, you've had the NHS step in the front line to really help our society and customers. And clearly the financial industry has a huge opportunity to do the same for customers in this point. I think as we'll face into the conversation going on, what's really important is two phases. One is not just the amount of support that is available, but equally the awareness and confidence of customers, colleagues, and wider society to actually avail of all of the support that there is available. And I've seen hugely across both the industry and in partners across the industry make these resources available more over the last 12 months than I've seen in the last 25 odd years that Niki is describing. And I think it's a function of how do we make all of these players work together to help each individual under the circumstances. So hopefully this conversation in itself does help serve that purpose, Charlene.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's all been really interesting. I think we'll move on now to talking about advice. So advice for individuals on managing stress, preventative measures, and also it would be interesting to know what resources are out there to help people. So David, I wonder if you could talk a bit about some statistics. So in recent years, have the widespread monetary issues caused by the pandemic and the cost of living crisis set a new bar for financial stress statistics within the workplace? Have you noticed a spike in the number of individuals dealing with these kinds of things?
Yeah, most definitely. There's a spike, and I think we're probably more prepared now than we've ever been to actually manage some of this, which is good news. I think first and foremost, if I can say this with care, is that it's important to distinguish between sudden financial hardship and not achieving a certain lifestyle. Because at some point you can just collaborate it all together and put it into one container. They are two very, very different things, which means that people have different problems to solve. And we have to be very clear about how some of these problems are more severe than others, and we don't lump them all together. And that brings me to perhaps less about statistics, Charlene, but more about the perception. And so a good psychologist will tell you there is no reality, there is only perception. Now, I'm not belittling the financial hardships that we all can find ourselves in, but sometimes how we manage that perception is key. Sometimes we have to cleanse the lens we're looking through. It gets a little bit muddy. It becomes, we're not all good at mindfulness. We're not all good at clearing it out. But what I would say is that there's two bits of advice that I can give that I would say, we should ask ourselves today, is there any new information for me to deal with? And if so, right, something new to work on. If not, okay, I'm still where I am. And the second question is, what more can I do today to help myself or the situation? And if there's nothing you can do, then there's nothing you can do. You almost have to sit it out. It's a moment in time. And then who else can help me? So that's almost the second part of the second question. So if not me, who else can assist me on this? And it's really trying to take those worry beads away. We're naturally worriers. So within our brain, amygdala actually tries to look after us emotionally, but actually it trips us up. It collects all the items that we don't like. And particularly just as we're going to bed, it says, rightio, David, have some of this. And it loads it all up for us, or it wakes us up just after an hour we've got to bed. And there are lots of things you can do to help that. You can actually do some journaling, which allows you to sort of write down some of the stuff throughout the day. So actually your mind has got it out of the way with. You've tackled it, you've faced it, you've asked those questions. Is there any more information? You've got it all out. So when you go to bed, it's not going to trip you up. I'm not saying these are solutions, they are not. But at the end of the day, what we perceive is what we project. So how we perceive the situation is going to dictate how we deliver ourselves and our behaviors. So we can't see what we're thinking. So other people can't see what we're thinking. They can't see how we're feeling, but our behaviors tell everything. So we have to be in charge of that, in charge of what we think, how we feel, how we behave. It's often referred to as cognitive behavioral therapy. We're not going to go into that today, of course, but we have some little tools and techniques that can help with all of this. But again, I would really say it's important to distinguish between sudden financial hardship and achieving a certain lifestyle. So we are better placed today than ever.
Thanks, David. That's really interesting. Niki, in your view, how can we help those with financial anxiety? And another thing I was wondering is, in some cases, is it better to offer help anonymously?
Yeah, so I think help comes in different ways, and it always depends on the individual, the relationship that individual wants to create around them to seek that help. So no matter, before you kind of think about what help and which a channel of help is better, I think it's really important to remember that we are all fundamentally responsible for our health and well-being. It's very much like physical health, where, we want to be in the best shape possible physically, we want to be in the best shape mentally as well, and just make sure that we are able to deal with anything, but life happens. and things, there will be bad days and there will be awful days and there will be great days. So it's being able to be in a position that where we've talked quite a lot over the last few years, especially with the pandemic. And I know we've mentioned that a few times today, but I think that the pandemic really shifted the dial on being able to talk about mental health, being able to talk about well-being. And I think that there was an event like that was the only way that we were going to start to come out of our houses and actually be a bit more open about how we were feeling. We're on Teams, we're having conversations like this. We weren't doing this before the pandemic, nearly as much. So I think that the first thing is about creating that safe space, knowing yourself, some of the stuff that David talked about there, getting out of your mind what you're thinking, writing it down, processing it. Now, quite often when you are seeking help, you are seeking that opportunity to process what you need, and you may not know the answer, but quite often by, talking to your therapist or talking to a friend or talking to, somebody at the bank, you're processing what it is that you need help with. And it's about creating that safe space. So what worries me quite a lot and keeps me up at night is the amount of people that are still not in a great place talking about their mental health. And if that's driven by financial worries, then that equally is really, really worrying. I think in terms of how we can help, and is it better anonymous? I think both channels work. It depends very much on the individual, and there is so much information out there now. We live in a society now where mental health is more and more higher up on the agenda, and we're starting to realise that events that happen in life have a knock-on impact on our mental health. So you have a great event, you run a marathon, it has a fantastic serotonin effect on your brain, and then you have a rush. Whereas you have an event like grief, and that can have a really kind of adverse impact on your mental health. So we're having to manage that on a day-to-day basis, and being able to ask for help. Anonymous channels do have their place, depending on the subject. And I think quite often with financial, that sometimes can help. If you're an employee in a bank who wants to talk to somebody about financial stress, your financial worries, an anonymous channel, talking to somebody, having employee assistance programs, having that kind of support, that's really, really helpful. And I think that's what we've probably built over the last few years, is different channels available for different avenues. But as I said, the most important thing is you can have all the help out there as possible, but you've got to be able to want to prioritise your mental health and anything that's driving that first. So the onus is always on the individual. We've got to take responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good point. And let's talk a bit more about the resources available to someone experiencing this. Raghu, are there any resources specific to the workplace or more widely available resources, mental health financial advisors that can help?
No, Charlene, it's a great point. I think just acknowledging what Niki said on got to ask for help, right? And I think that's the starting point. I think to the question asked earlier on resources available, I think there's a lot of work that's been done across the industry. So let me start by taking first more of a customer lens and then talk about the workplace. I think from a customer perspective, there's a number of things that we've sort of set up, not just over the past year or so, but I think which have been used extensively. So the opportunity, for example, to reach out and talk to someone about your finances in what we call a financial health check that we offer at NatWest. We've had about 700,000 of those over the course of the last year or so. And that enables someone to really reach out and start to have a conversation about their own individual circumstances, right? Talk through, the income expenditure calculators, benefits calculators, access to a cost of living hub. And I suppose to Niki's point, that's available through many channels. So you can do that digitally and access those tools on your own, or start to do that through a video or directly face-to-face through advisors, depending on your level of comfort and your confidence. We've got things like Banking My Way, which are for vulnerable customers that have specific circumstances in terms of how they would like to deal with banks. And we've got specialist teams that cater to acknowledging and then servicing customers in that way. There's one thing that I'd pick up is something called, our credit scores that are quite obvious, but we've started to look at the Know Your Credit Score functionality, which starts to give you, your own personalized credit report, but insights into how you can manage your finances better to improve those scores, but also then simulate how your future financial actions could potentially impact it. So you can play around, see what decisions could you make? And I think with the first organization, we just started launching that to all of market for free. And the intent there is to provide real wide access to those tools. So it gets people more comfortable, more confident in understanding how their credit score evolves, but equally then enables us to have a conversation around finances and a basis on which to reach out to seek help. There's also then on the borrowing customers, there's a whole host of payment relief options for those who are struggling, right? Particularly around loans and mortgages, be it around payment deferrals, be it around, particularly around fees and charges and how one can get relief around those, particularly in periods where we're struggling. And that's happening across the industry. If I take a workplace sort of lens, and I think particularly when it comes to banking employees, and you're probably picking that up in, I think a lot of our audience today are probably employees working in the banking sector. The research we did was, while 1 in 2 people generally feel anxious about their finances, 1 in 3 employees agree that it actually affects their mental health. So this is them acknowledging. But what's interesting is 3 in 5 employees agree that money worries actually affect their performance at work, right? And it's starting to pick that up. I think we've taken a very proactive lens on how do you start to look at financial well-being as a core pillar in what employees require, but equally what employers are increasingly offering. So I'll give you a sense of the kind of things that we've put in place, and I'm sure, Niki, you have similar sort of plays, and hopefully that starts to answer some of the questions, David, that you'd raised earlier, right? So we've got obviously there's a whole range of benefits and employee things. Flexible working, I think it is an important element, right, on what options are available to customers or particularly employees around how they manage their work-life balance and reduce stress. If I think about, we've got a bespoke financial well-being hub that's available to employees that offers both practical and emotional help and advice, both internally and externally. So let me give you a few examples. I think one, we've got a 24/7 employee assistance program, and that offers free, confidential, independent advice that's available to our customers, as well as particularly our colleagues, around immediate but medium-term support to anyone facing financial difficulty in the 2 event dimensions that David had referred to earlier, but potentially experiencing potential mental health issues as well. So that's 24/7, independent, confidential. A number of you will be familiar with the Bank Workers Charity that supports thousands of people from across the banking community, not just NatWest, and that's open to all UK employees of the bank and their family members. But they provide advice, expert support services, and in some cases, even financial assistance. We've got partnerships with companies like Silver Cloud. Now, that's an emotional well-being program that provides our colleagues support on money worries, but also around anxiety, resilience, mindfulness, sleep, the things that David had referred to earlier. And we encourage a lot of our colleagues to also undertake the financial health checks that we provide customers. Now, in addition, we've got partnerships with a number of debt charities and partner organizations like the Debt Advice Foundation, Citizens Advice, the National Debt Line, Money Advice Councils, as well as partnerships with local councils and charities that can help with what are more local events. And we found a number of referrals that we make for customers and colleagues in this regard. Now, specifically, I think it was a question that was referred to initially was, do banking colleagues feel this more than others? And I think there's something we need to acknowledge, that occasionally where we've got people that consider themselves banking professionals sometimes fail to acknowledge whether they themselves are in financial difficulty and feeling financial anxiety. And we've got to acknowledge that everyone in our industry is facing pretty much the same pressures that others are in other industries. But they may feel, I think, a difficulty to acknowledge it because it may reflect on their professional competence as financial service providers, both socially and professionally. And it's incumbent upon us through these programs, through these tools, through these resources, to really make that available. But I think Niki's point on creating that safe environment to really enable others to step up and start to reach out for help becomes really important. But hopefully, Charlene, that gives you some sense on the kind of resources that are available both within the organization to all customers, to employees, and then through partner organizations as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Raghu.
Raghu, it reminds me of the old adage of cobbler's shoes.
Yeah, it certainly does. Niki, would you like to just speak briefly on any preventative measures that you think individuals can take to avoid these financial stresses?
Yeah, some of it is probably just a recap of things that we've already talked about as well, Charlene. You know, David talked at the top of the call about ways to keep perspective in mind, you know, and reality versus perspective. I think that's a really huge one. You know, the analogy that I always use with people when I talk to them, you know, is around, you know, life is actually can be quite simple. Our thoughts are what makes it complex sometimes. You know, and sometimes when we're overwhelmed, taking our thought process back to something quite simple, you know, with some of those prompts that David called out earlier, you know, it is a way of, you know, it is that CBT of just calming ourselves down, bringing ourselves back down to that perspective, writing down what we're thinking, you know, etc. So I think some of the things that we've talked about around the best preventative measure is about you knowing that you're doing everything that you can to make your mental health a well-being, and that means that the factors that are in your life, whether that be your finances, whether that be your family situation, whether that be anything else, you know, you are having those experiences, because we all have lived experiences, we're all human at the end of the day, but actually the processing of those experiences is something that you reflect on and you think about, actually, do I need a bit of support here? One of the things as an advocate that I'm really, really passionate about is we live in a society where not only do we feel like it's a stigma to ask for help or to say that you have a problem, but actually, you know, I remember years ago I would laugh at American TV shows where they'd go and visit their therapist, you know, and we'd have this whole you know, laugh and you know joking with kind of our friends across the pond saying, you know, oh, they need a therapist, when actually I think they had it right all along. Life is hard. Life is hard sometimes. You know, the older we get, you know, we have, you know, lots of different things that we're trying to juggle. Sitting down in a safe space with somebody for a period of time on a regular basis is a fantastic way for you to just check in with yourself. I do it on a regular basis. So I've had a couple of life events where, you know, I've had the choice between medication and counselling, and I've always chose counselling, and I keep counselling now because it is such an important way. So I think those kind of preventative measures, making sure that more of that is available. And, you know, Raghu talked about all the societies and all the things that are around us. What we've done in terms of from a colleague perspective and a customer perspective is that we've created some really amazing mechanisms for people to create those safe spaces to be able to have those conversations. I think that there is always more that can be done. So one of my worries is that, you know, the way that the banking industry and financial services responded to the pandemic is hands down one of the proudest things I've ever seen. You know, that ability to say that actually we are all in lockdown now. What equipment do you need? What do you need to support, you know, get ourselves on technology? We really showed that we can move quick when we need to. And mental health went to the top of the agenda, and that was fantastic. My worry is that now all gets lost in amongst other things that are happening. So, you know, it's how do you keep those conversations alive? What we're doing today is a fantastic way of keeping, you know, keeping that agenda and that discussion going, because the next generations are coming through, and the next generations have got their struggles and they've got their, you know, they will have different, you know, financial kind of thought processes to how I do today. So it's really, really important to make sure that we get it right so that, you know, generations behind us can really benefit from this not being a problem going forward.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And David, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Niki's point, really. It's good to talk, isn't it? We discovered in the 1900s, we discovered occupational therapy. And through occupational therapy, we realized that actually by talking through some stuff, our physical symptoms disappeared. It was like, how does that work? Well, the mind and body are affecting each other.
Absolutely.
So, you know, Niki, I couldn't be a bigger advocate. You know, it's good to talk, counsel, talk to people. And of course, for other people, it's good to listen.
Absolutely. I think talking helps you actually think about your listening as well. So I think, you know, role modeling your own way of being able to talk, you know, as an advocate, the way that I'm then able to I'm able to confidently hold space for others and listen without thinking about I need to give them the solution is and we do that with our customers all the time as well. It's just the person who's going through the experience is the person who needs to process. It's just the fact that you've got people there and things around you to help, that's really important.
Raghu, are there any other ways that you think that banking professionals can support customers experiencing these kinds of worries? Anything we haven't touched upon?
Yeah, I think we've covered the key things, right? Offering a combination of channels, I think, is important because each individual's circumstances are unique, right? So I think making sure that we've got a whole range so a person can actually choose which bit they're most comfortable with and then gradually grow in confidence as we play through. I think the point on really building that confidence I see as quite central to the purpose that we hold, at least as financial institutions and the industry, is how do we start to build that confidence amongst customers and society as a whole. I'll give you maybe 3 examples of specific teams that actually cater to unique circumstances. I think one is what we call our financial health and support teams. And these are customers that find themselves, I think, David, in the way you described it, as in real difficulty today. And the assistance that's available in nursing them back to financial health, right? So these are, a number of customers that actually reach out to the bank where they've got borrowing needs and are struggling to repay. And we've had circumstances where we've been able to manage tailored solutions, right, that were put in place to help restore a customer's health, including things like breathing spaces, encouraging the take-up of free independent money advice, agreeing forbearance, while customers are adjusting to changes in their circumstances. And that's something that both customers and colleagues need to be really aware of, that there are specialist teams that cater to those who are struggling. And quite often we find that those who actually have that conversation are hugely relieved at having done it, right? So that would be one instance. I think the second, we've got teams of, customer support specialists, or what we call customer protection managers, that are actually trained to deal with people that are going through domestic, economic, or financial abuse, right? Or those in vulnerable circumstances. And we've helped thousands of customers in really talking through how they could be supported. And those are very delicate conversations, but just knowing that you have someone that you can reach out to and have specialists that know how to have these conversations, we find the impact that we've had on individuals' lives in doing so is tremendous. And clearly matching them with the right partners to enable that to take place, be it Citizens Advice, be it other sort of charitable foundations, where we actually do warm handovers. That's something that we find is growing and growing in terms of relevance, but equally in terms of the value that it adds to people in specific circumstances. And I think vulnerability, depending on how broadly you define it, and Niki was talking about regulation, we think 1 in 2 customers today in the market are potentially vulnerable, depending on how far you want to take that definition. I think the third bit, which is important, which we haven't touched on, is the stress that comes with fraud, right? And the impact of fraud or financial crime or something that's an event that takes you by surprise. And I think it's really important, and I think the entire industry is taking this incredibly seriously, is the detrimental impact it's having on the lives of individuals, but also businesses in the UK economy, and that's at an unprecedented high level. And we're actively engaging in how do we build those defense mechanisms, but equally, how do we educate customers to help themselves, right? So nearly a tenth of, I think about 6,000 colleagues today are engaged in looking at things like financial crime, fraud, anti-money laundering. And that's particularly to help bad actors to come out of the community, us to keep the safety and the integrity of the system in place. But I think that bit on how do we protect ourselves from those events that really cause, and we've been at the back end of conversations where customers are defrauded. And that's a really emotionally distressing experience because it destroys trust, not just in institution and individuals, but makes you feel incredibly insecure. And then your cognitive ability and your emotional ability to take sound decisions in that context is severely impeded. So I think those are 3 sort of, an extreme debt situation, vulnerable circumstances where even down to the extent of abuse, And then where you've experienced a fraud event, really reach out to specialist teams that I think across the industry are trained to deal with this and actually do so on a daily basis.
Thanks, Raghu. And David, in the wider corporate world, what advice would you give to people who are concerned about colleagues that are maybe experiencing financial stress and are not quite sure how to approach it?
Yeah, I would say it comes back to my original conversation about whose responsibility is it. So first of all, we have a responsibility to ourselves and we have a responsibility to each other. So peer-to-peer coaching, peer-to-peer learning, peer-to-peer observations are absolutely critical. Don't ignore it, okay? Just see what's going on. But I would also place a higher responsibility today on managers than ever. So if we go back to the good old days of management, it was always about KPIs. It was about your key performance indicators. We had so many things that we had to hit. We got onto our appraisal once a year. We said, yeah, you've hit this and hit this, but here's your development for next year. Pull in your personal development plan or personal improvement plan, and off you go. The times have changed. Managers have a greater responsibility, and we're finding it in Abstract that we are getting inundated with requests for managerial skill sets. How to recognize these things, how to deal with these things, how to have those delicate conversations. So there's for any of you that have been through coaching exams and qualifications, you will notice that there's a fine line between coaching and counseling. And again, there's a fine line between management, coaching, and counseling. They are three different disciplines. So managers need to become more adept in the first layer of counseling and then know when to refer, how to refer, where to go to, etc. And I think that is really, really critical. So in Abstract, we talk for managers moving from KPIs, your key performance indicators, to what we call KBIs, your key behavioral indicators. So what are people doing? What are we expecting them to do? They're not doing it. Why are they not doing it? What's the symptoms? Let's get to the underlying cause, to the root cause. Because quite often we treat symptoms and we put a plaster over it. It's not enough. It will come back. It will grow. It will be worse. Get to the root cause. Take time out. And it comes back to Niki's conversation about root causes, about talking and having those conversations. And Raghu's conversations earlier, can reflect also back in the customer. Give them some time to talk and recognize is it okay? Raghu, were you coming in there?
No, completely ignored what you're saying there.
I thought you'd come off mute, sorry. Thanks,
David. Niki, have you got anything to add to that before we move to a Q&A?
No, I think we discussed this the other day, and at the end of the day, we're just all human beings, right? Having a human experience. And I think when we come into the office, we often kind of let the hierarchy and the grades and the pays and the scales and the jobs that we do come before the fact that actually we're just human beings, each having that kind of experience. And it's so interesting how many people don't actually know each other, much about each other outside of the jobs that they do. So they take the time, get to know each other. That line manager conversation, absolutely so important. But I think we said the other day, it's just on all of us, isn't it? We all the people you sit around, the people that you're surrounded by, take time to get to know them, really enjoy those conversations, because it's those that will help you reach out when you need help or when somebody else needs help.
I think one of the obstacles that's got in the way recently, Niki, is the COVID pandemic, where we're now all on virtual. So it's really hard to get the nuance of behaviour and how someone's feeling. We seldom ask how anybody's weekend went. We get straight down to business, It's like, right, can everyone see my screen? Off we go.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were in a room, you'd be having a chat, you'd get there 10 minutes early, you'd grab a coffee, you'd talk. We're not doing that. We've become transactional. And I think we have to be a little bit more maybe interdependent with each other.
It's interesting, actually, you say that, David, because I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, so I don't know whether it's different personalities, but I find that on Teams, I spend more time having those "what did you do on the weekend" conversations, because in the office, you're just jumping from meeting to meeting, especially if your meetings are now on the phones with other people on Teams. It's those both of those environments have their place to have those conversations, don't they? But I appreciate that, it can isolate people. If somebody doesn't phone you all day, you've not had a chat with anybody. So there's complexities on all sides of it, really. But yeah, absolutely. The bottom line is make time to get to know each other.
And I think conscious effort in that hybrid environment, to your point, David, if you don't have that on the top of your radar as a manager or as a colleague, then you can very easily slip into what you call transactional behavior. So it's a good reminder.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I just made a note, Niki. I think I've got it back to front. So I've just made a note of that.
It's all good.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your brilliant contributions. Really interesting discussion. We've got just under 15 minutes left, so I'd like to just open up the floor to our viewers and just give them an opportunity to ask any questions they might have. So for those of you who are watching, please feel free to just type a question into the box for our panel, and I will try and get through as many as we can in the time we've got left. So to kick us off, I do have one from the audience. So what part can internal learning programs for employees play in helping with this? And I'll just open that out to all.
Well, let me give it a start. I think it plays a huge part, right? So I referred to the financial wellbeing hub. That's a bespoke colleague play that we've got within NatWest. I think the intent there is to provide what we call internal and external resources, and within that they have access to the NatWest Group Academy, where there's a number of learning programs that are bespoke to certain individual circumstances. We've also got recordings of a lot of popular speakers, right, who talk about certain elements from an external perspective. And we've seen that goes down incredibly well with colleagues, particularly where they're trying to identify with subjects as well as perspectives that they can identify with and that are relevant to their own unique circumstance. So I think they play an incredibly important role. What's important there is also to really listen to what is most relevant to our colleagues, right? And creating the space to do that on a regular basis. I think seeking feedback on what is and what is not working, both anonymously and in rooms together, I think becomes quite an important tool to help inform how you tailor and evolve those over time. Niki?
Yeah, I think I was probably just going to add in terms from a Lloyds perspective, very much the similar in terms of what you've just said there, Raghu. But I think also for me, I was just contemplating this question, thinking learning is such a broad subject, isn't it? So, there's so much around, listening skills. Do you feel like you want to polish upon your listening skills? I mean, hopefully from today's webcast, a lot of people listening to this can think about the things that they, is it something for them personally that they want to, develop some learning about, more financial awareness? Do they want to develop some learning about being a better line manager? Do they, so it's such a broad catalogue. But what there is lots of programs. Obviously, David has, it's his job essentially as well. But there are so many organisations out there. We live in a world of podcasts. We live in a world of YouTube. There's a lot out there. So, take that time to develop yourself, take that time to just keep learning. I go for a run and listen to a podcast, but that podcast could be anything from just something social to something that I actually feel like I need at that time as well. So learning is a great way to actually manage your mental health. It's one of the 6 behaviors that actually, if you're learning, it means that your brain is still ingesting information, is still feeling fresh. So actually, it's a great thing to do for your mental health as well.
And if I can just come in on the back of that, Charlene, the more we are aware, the more we can control. So it's raising that awareness. And one of the great things for us is to actually provide case studies, because if you've got a case study of how someone's problem to solve, then how someone reacted to it, then how they went through the remedy of it, and what were the issues, with that case study, what you'll find is actually there's a lot of similarities to a lot of different people. So we all have similar problems to solve. We just assess it differently, we treat it differently, and we get a different outcome. But if you can see case studies of how someone's actually managed that process, it gives us a great idea of, do you know what? I'm not that far away from that. You know, it gives you a comparison of, actually, I'm okay at this. I'm not as bad as I thought. I've actually got through some of this. And I think that's really important. So the more we are aware, the more we can control.
Thanks all. I've got another question, and it's can the panel recommend any additional services like charities that we can signpost to our customers who have financial anxiety and perhaps also underlying conditions like depression? Are there any charities that you know of?
I think Mind comes to mind. So first off, go to Mind and talk and Google and have a look and see what's available. There's certain things available for certain demographics and certain economic situations. But I would say first and foremost, go to Mind, unless anybody else has got a preference.
Lloyds had a 6-year partnership with Mental Health UK. It finished just last year, a really successful partnership, raised millions and loads of awareness. One of the things that the fundraising funded was actually a money, health and services advice piece. So Mental Health UK is my go-to charity for anything to do with financial advice. And the other one that I would say, which I think is a game changer for colleagues, is Bank Workers Charity, which Raghu, you've mentioned. That's made such a difference to so many people's lives and colleagues that I work with here, especially because it's available to their families as well. And we've had a couple of guest speakers, come in and talk about financial anxiety and other topics from Bank Workers Charity, and for a charity they are absolutely fantastic. Brilliant. So those are the two that I would call out. They don't work on any commission.
No, I would echo Bank Workers Charity, particularly because we're talking to the Chartered Banking Institute here. I think they've made a fantastic contribution to a lot of our colleagues. I mentioned a few. I do want to call out Citizens Advice in particular, given that they've got a number of local chapters that are helping individuals. And again, we've seen through our partnership the difference that they can and do make to people in those circumstances. And I suppose more on the debt side, the Debt Advice Foundation and the National Debt Line would be two that I'd also call out. But there are a whole host of those at a local level. You'd be surprised at how much you can do by just calling your local council as well, which we found where there's a slight apprehension, but the resources and forthcoming nature of some councils is fantastic. So we found those partnerships incredibly helpful.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank our three panelists for all their insights today. I think you can all agree it was a really, really interesting discussion. And thank you for joining us and being here today. Thanks, everyone.